new elements that will be incorporated to help manage, such as batteries, storage systems, in order to be able to store energy when you have a surplus in the production, and dispatch it when it's needed. Then this type of production is also more vulnerable to natural hazards. This means that, for example, very cold episodes could have ice aggression on the wind blades. The PV panels can be affected by dust, so the efficiency is reduced. Hail also can damage them. Hurricanes can also affect the air renewables. And then in the long term, also climate change is there and can affect the sources of this energy production. So it's also something to keep an eye on. Therefore, it's clear that skillful predictions of wind and solar radiation can help estimate energy production, manage the system, and build a resilient network that has diverse energy sources. Okay. Sorry, going a bit slow. Okay, now I'll show you some of the climate services that are currently here. Okay, some climate services that are already used in the energy sector, and well, we'll start from. I'm including also the past, because I believe this is also a climate service that is currently used for pipeline analysis, to choose new developments, new projects, resource assessment, be able to estimate the amount of energy that you can gain from different projects. And then in the short term, this is perhaps the most used. Here I'm talking about 1 to 10 days forecasts. This helps predict the energy production of solar and wind, and this is also important to minimize the deviation costs. Predict ramp events. These are rapid changes of production that can affect the transmission system. Control strategy on hybrid wind and solar. There are some plants that combine both wind and solar in the same entry point, and this can be managed with some storage system in order to have a good optimization of the resources. Then, of course, operation and maintenance. It's important to choose the right moment to do the maintenance on, for example, the turbines, in order to minimize the losses of having the turbines stopped, and prevent extreme events in the short term. Then, if we move to longer timescales, seasonal, or weeks, months, or seasons ahead, the predictions can be used for adjusting hedging volumes for next months or for weeks. And also there are some extreme events that can be predicted in those timescales, which can also affect various aspects, such as heat waves, cold spells, or drought. And then going into climate projections, decades ahead. Also, it's important to see how how climate change can affect the resources. And there is already some development or some requirements towards reporting the climate risks and opportunities. Okay, so here I'd like to talk a bit about the climate services that are used, the challenges, because indeed there is a lot being done on the research side, improvements in the models, developments of methodologies, but then we all know there is a bit that gap between what really goes through to the decision context to the industry. So this is mainly for the longer time scales. So the predictions at the moment, in some cases, are sometimes perceived a bit like immature. This I think it's the nature of this type of predictions, due to the uncertainty, the probabilistic nature, make it that they have this perception as not being a solid or a trustable product. So I think here there's got to be better efforts to extract useful signals. So to be able to focus on what we know, not what we don't know, and try to transmit what can be extracted. So obviously this comes with communication. So to have valid expectations of what a product can and cannot provide. And then also this is all related to the skill. You know, some variables for some regions have less skills, so have to try to obtain that information that can be more useful. Then options also to be able to increase that value could be adapt temporal, spatial scales. So try to derive a product where you can extract that valid signal I was talking about. Then other aspect, this goes more into the decision-making processes of each particular industry or area, is the tailored forecast. This is also very important because you need to really know what's the problem you have at hand to know what type of information can be useful. You might not be that much interested in knowing exactly an absolute value up or down, but it might be more interesting just to know if an anomaly goes positive or negative. So we have to really try to focus on the needs. And then, of course, standardization comes into play. Here, an example with the error metrics. They have to be adapted to the product, but also they have to be well explained. We have to really know what we are expecting from a product, and the standardization can help in that sense. Okay, now I'd like to highlight some initiatives from the energy sector, which are also going in this direction to try to have that forum to bring people from academia, from energy sector, from different companies to have this conversation and sit together and have think about standards and frameworks and provide some guidelines for some uses. Also identify the paths to increase application of the forecast information in the decision-making processes. So it belongs to the International Energy Agency, and it focuses on forecasting weather-driven energy system. There are different topics in there, but lately there has been more and more emphasis on seasonal forecasting. For example, there was a workshop last year, and also there are topics such as climate change that are starting to be part of it. So it also focuses on that need of standardization and communication between the parties. And finally, we'll touch on climate change, which also is a topic that affects directly the energy sources. There is the Task Force on Climate-Related Finance Disclosure. This is a framework to provide guidance and recommendations on the communication of the financial risks of companies' assets based on the climate impacts that they can have. So it can talk about both risks and opportunities. And there are different aspects. There are the physical risks and transition risks. So the part that touches more on climate services would be communicating those physical risks, identifying the risks depending on the type of asset. And there are some topics you can see in the table on the left related to different variables. And then they are separated into chronic or acute. Chronic would be something that is changing but more slowly paced, whereas acute are things like hurricanes or things more localized. And this is a very clear example of that need of a standardization, because there is a lot of information from climate projections that can be used here. But there is a need to standardize and be transparent and have reporting that is comparable from different places. So I think I'll jump to the conclusions here. But as the energy system is clearly impacted by climate conditions, and this is even more with the increase of renewable share. Then climate services are becoming more and more demanded, and with them, communication and standardization will facilitate climate services understanding and therefore the uptake by stakeholders. With that, I'll finish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for this presentation about the key challenges that climate change poses to the energy sector and the role that climate services have in energy assessments. I think this is key. We have just briefly a few minutes for maybe taking a couple of questions. I see a question in the Q&A from Charlotte. Maybe I can read this, and then I also have a question myself, unless another one comes in from our audience. So Charlotte Pascoe asks, does your model for meeting demand include demand-side shift? So for example, the Octopus Energy trial in the UK, which reduced peak time demand to an order of magnitude that was equivalent to bringing a coal power plant online. I don't know if this question is clear to you, Andrea?
Well, I'm not familiar with the terms that she mentions, but yeah, so I wouldn't be able to answer yet.
Okay, maybe you can have a conversation with Charlotte, unless I really don't know whether the audience can actually ask verbally. I don't believe that's the feature that we have here. But let me ask you actually a very different type of question. Is more the broader perspective. I think your presentation focuses very much on the technical aspects and the importance you mentioned of having a standardization that could bring transparency to the processes of the type of data that is being collected, etc. But I ask myself, so in actually really not only identifying the problems and the options and the opportunities that climate variability and change may pose for assessing renewable energy, how important do you think is to take as a point of departure, not necessarily our knowledge and modeling, but actually the customer need or the industry, a specific broader views? That will be the decision-making context aspect of climate services. And a related question is, how important do you think is to have domain expertise in this case in the renewables sector, and how do you work as a meteorologist with domain experts? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so yeah, as you say, turning around the pipeline is very important. I also have this background, so I have this idea of knowing what you can get from a model and then seeing how that can be converted into something useful. But as you say, we have to, in order to get some useful products and information, we have to go the other way around and go to the problem and ask ourselves, what information do we need for that problem? And then maybe focusing on how to see what can be extracted. So it's important to know, of course, if you only ask yourself what information I need for this, you can ask whatever, but then might not be realistic, it might not be possible. So it's also very important to have that knowledge behind of what the models provide, what are the critical things that you may not assume if you haven't worked with models before. So it's that's putting yourself at the other side, but with that expertise knowledge of what you're talking about. So it's complicated because you have to find that balance of what cannot be done. So but it's the way we have to work. So I think in there also this standardization may help, because you can try to design or create a product that is adapted to answer the questions that you yourself ask. You don't know if they have answer or not, but you have to produce something that at least tries to answer. And then with some quality assessment, you can really be able to analyze if that product really is giving you useful information. But yeah, it's difficult, but it's the way to progress is to put ourselves at the end of the chain, because otherwise that information is not going to be useful, even if it has a very good quality or it responds to very good to the metrics that you use. So in the end, it's only useful if it's useful for a decision context.
Thank you. So clearly what you are saying, we need to be working in teams that are multilingual, that know everything from the problem to be solved to also knowledge about the modeling and what climate data can and cannot do. That is critically important. Let me use the opportunity to ask you very quickly, just one more quick question. So, or maybe just to think about this if nothing comes to mind immediately, but if I were to ask you, what is a key criteria for climate services that are fit for purpose for the renewables industry? What comes to mind to you immediately?
I wouldn't know something. The problematic here is that there is not one single problem or one single thing that needs climate services. So you would have to go to each specific case. So I would say that's the problematic here, that when you're thinking in general, you might get some information, but then in order to really be useful, it has to be more targeted. And even inside a company, there are different aspects, different sectors that may be interested in different parts of the climate service. So I would just say that there is a very big variety.
Fair enough. The decision context needs to start first. Thank you very much, Andrea. Just a reminder to our audience that we will have time at the end to have a conversation with our speakers. I would like now to give the floor to Alec Vesey. Thank you very much for being here. Alec joined AXA XL Science and Natural Perils team in 2021 after completing a degree in a PhD in Atmosphere, Oceans and Climate at the University of Reading. And his thesis was quantifying Arctic storm risk in a changing climate. Alex has worked within the AXA team for 3 years now, so he brings the experience and the expertise of what this team does, and we really look forward to listening to you. Except, Alec, we do see your speaker notes version in the screen right now, rather than the...
Excellent, thank you.
Now it's excellent. Okay, the floor is yours,
Perfect.
15-20 minutes. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction, and also for giving me this opportunity to speak about some of the work that I do within the insurance industry and at AXA XL. So I'm going to sort of give an introduction to AXA XL, and also what sort of goes on within the insurance industry, what sort of research projects do we get up to, and hopefully this will give a flavour of what our needs are and how we use climate data in our day-to-day business. So I'll just start off by explaining who are AXA XL and who are the science team. So AXA is one of the biggest insurance and reinsurance companies globally. I think last year we had gross revenues of about 100 billion, and about half of these came from property and casualty insurance and reinsurance. And we employ about 150,000 employees across, and we write insurance contracts over 50 countries, and we've got about 94 million clients. So AXA is one of the biggest insurance companies out there, and so quite fortunate to work for them. And I'll explain a bit more about who are AXA. So AXA, like I said, is one of the largest multinational insurance companies across the world. So AXA XL, I work for AXA XL. AXA XL was formerly XL Catlin, but then AXA merged with XL Catlin in about 2018. And AXA XL are sort of responsible for about 18% of the revenues of AXA. AXA has multiple functions, and AXA XL is just one sort of clog in the machine. We specialize at AXA XL in property and casualty and specialty risk. Our lines of business include marine insurance, energy insurance, aerospace, and we also insure against properties and casualty and for casualties. Within property, natural perils are the primary cause of damage. So this includes hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, wildfires, flooding, European windstorms. And so that is sort of what I bring to AXA XL, and my expertise, as was mentioned. My PhD was looking at Arctic cyclones, but through that PhD, I sort of gained an understanding of European windstorms. Over the last sort of 3 years, I've sort of developed my understanding of global hazards, including hurricanes, wildfires, and severe convective storms. So the AXA XL science team, we're a small team of scientists and actuaries, and we ultimately aim to help implement the latest science into our business. And our responsibilities include ensuring that the company has an up-to-date and robust view of present day and future climate risk, view of risk. And we also support model evaluations that aid and also support business decisions that are made by chief risk or underwriting officers, and we help to sort of translate the latest science in a way that they can digest and sort of act upon it and make business decisions. And we're regularly communicating the latest science, may that be the latest IPCC report, but also the latest publications, and we sort of communicate that internally. So risk is a function of not only hazard, but it's also a function of exposure and vulnerability. So hazard sort of could be your hurricane, and factors to consider is the frequency of that hurricane. How often does the hurricane make landfall, say in Florida? How severe is that event? How large is the wind radius? And then we need to look at the exposure. So we need to look at our building locations. What's that building size? What's that building value? And then we also need to look at vulnerability. How susceptible is that building to damage? And that can depend on the construction type. Is it made of wood or is it made of concrete? But also other factors to consider is the age of the building. So older buildings are generally were built with older building codes, and they're less resilient to wind and hazards. So when we work within the science team, we are constantly focusing on these three factors that will contribute to risk and damage and financial loss. So we do this by working internally, but we also have many collaborations with academics at different institutions. Being a Reading University alumni, I have good close links with the Reading University, and we have a few collaborations there. But I'm going to sort of speak a bit more about this going forward. Firstly, I just wanted to introduce the insurance and reinsurance industry. So the insurance market structure in brief. So there are primary insurers. These are the direct risk takers and the contract writers. This includes AXA and AXA XL. We are writing the insurance contracts and insuring the buildings. Reinsurance is when reinsurance includes insuring insurance contracts, so it's reinsurance. And companies that, yeah, like I said, include us at AXA and AXA XL, but also other companies such as Allianz and Aviva. So insurance brokers, they provide services to these primary insurers, and they facilitate transactions, and these include companies like Gallagher, Aon, Guy Carpenter, and Willis Towers Watson. And then we have the model vendors. So these companies, they build industry catastrophe models, which I'll explain a bit later, but they are the primary tool that we use to quantify risk and quantify how susceptible our exposure a building is to say hurricane risk or wildfire risk or windstorm risk, and companies include RMS, AIR, CoreLogic, JBA, and Fathom. So if you look at our historical record, so this is global insured losses from natural disasters since 1950, and you can see that over the last 20 or so years, we have sort of started to experience quite unprecedented losses, economic losses as well, but this plot shows insured losses, and generally we have increased. The insurance losses have increased over time. In 2023, all natural disasters sort of culminated in about 100 billion of insured losses, which will be distributed across all of the primary insurers. And some of the biggest years that we've had in our industry was in 2005, 2011, and 2017. Some factors to consider when looking at sort of this graph is it's not only climate change. So generally with climate change, natural hazards have sort of become a bit more intense and the frequency has changed. But because we're looking at risk and damage, we also need to take into account the exposure changes and the vulnerability changes. So these all contribute to the trends and losses that we have seen. And per peril, tropical cyclones and severe convective storms, they contribute the most to our insured losses globally. Severe convective storms include hail, a tornado, and straight line wind gusts. And a lot of our exposure or a lot of our losses are dominated by the US. So that's where there's quite a large uptake in insurance. Many properties are seeking insurance, but also in the US, you have a lot of natural hazards happen in the US. Tropical cyclones, wildfires, severe convective storms. So what is a catastrophe model that I mentioned before? So these are our primary tool for quantifying risk at a certain location. They're sort of built or can be dissected into multiple modules. So the hazard module in the top left, this is the event set generation and the intensity calculation. So the hazard module has a stochastic event set of, say, 10,000 events. And with those, if those events are tropical cyclones, they would be 10,000 tracks of cyclones. And then we would add in, the CAT model would add in a wind field across that track, and that will give you your intensity. We then put in our exposure, and to see if that building is intersected by that cyclone, and then it would go down, go along the system into the vulnerability module and work out how much damage that event, that stochastic event, would lead to that, would impact that building. And then we put in our policy conditions into the loss module, and then we get an output of the expected damage. The hazard module is sort of most relevant for climate science, and we like to think that the catastrophe models use the latest meteorological data and methods. Within the AXA Excel Science team, we need to compare vendors, but we can also want to compare version updates. These catastrophe models are updated as the science sort of updates, and we get more and more data. So we need to compare vendors, but also compare different versions. But CAT models, they're not available for every peril or sub-peril globally. And CAT models, they're not perfect. They might not use the latest methods or data. So that's where we come in and evaluate them. But there are many business decisions that cannot be answered by a catastrophe model and require the expertise of the science team. So I'm going to now sort of give some examples of how we use climate data. So we have an ongoing collaboration with the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. So the problem that we found about 6 or 7 years ago, there are many forecasting agencies, universities, and private entities that release seasonal hurricane predictions. So how many basin-wide hurricanes will occur in the North Atlantic this year? And we saw that there was a need to try and collect and also present all of these seasonal predictions in one centralized place. So with the help from the Barcelona Supercomputer, we have a website that you can view, which summarizes on the x-axis different agencies, universities, and private entities, how many hurricanes they expect for this season. This season is very worrying because nearly all of the forecasting agencies predict there to be a very high number of hurricanes this year. So there might be much higher losses than we have found in the past. Talking about climate change as well. So since 2020, there's been increasing pressure for increasing external and internal pressure to perform climate change stress tests. So in the UK, an external regulator would include the Bank of England. And they sort of require us to do climate change stress tests, which look at trying projecting losses in 10, 30 years time based on the impacts of climate change. So the way that we go about performing these climate change stress tests is we will first look at the literature, speak to experts, and we would just sort of determine the scientific consensus per atmospheric peril. We then concentrate on the most material perils. So most material means the highest loss on our portfolio. And then we would then map the frequency and intensity adjustments to future scenarios. So what in the future, sort of what temperature are we going to reach in 10 or 30 years time, depending on different emission scenarios. And then we'll use our industry CAT models to quantify loss projections per peril. However, establishing what the scientific consensus of climate change is on perils is very time consuming for us. We have to read a lot of papers. Review papers are very useful to us in the insurance industry because they summarize the consensus from a lot of studies. And this is something that we could seek help with. There are a lot of sub-perils, so if you're looking at flooding, you're looking at fluvial flooding, coastal flooding, and pluvial flooding. They're all sort of changing a bit differently due to climate change. So it takes a lot of time to attain the scientific consensus of how climate change will impact these sub-perils. And the results from the climate change stress test in 2021 is sort of summarized here. So in 2021, we had to complete the CBES stress test, and we had to map or project our losses at 2030 and 2050 under an early action and late action scenario following the RCPs. And you can see how it's not just insurers that have to do these stress tests, but it's also banks and life insurers. And we have to project how our losses may change in the future. Tropical cyclones sort of dominate our industry. So you can see on the right-hand plot that the biggest change is coming from tropical cyclones. So what are the benefits of standardizing climate services to the insurance sector? So the size of science teams within the insurance industry are sort of outnumbered by the number of colleagues. So our team is quite small. Insurers or primary insurers, there are a lot of underwriters within the company that they speak to the clients and they write insurance contracts. They are sort of writing and making money for the company, whereas we're sort of adding a sort of a value in terms of communicating the latest science. And often we are sort of inundated with requests, or we have a lot to do and a lot to research. And if we standardize climate services, this would save us a lot of time and enable us to do a lot more. So I'm just going to wrap up my conclusion and then take some questions. So the AXA XL science team, we collaborate and work internally to implement the latest science on natural perils into our business. We are looking at all aspects of risk, hazard exposure and vulnerability. Our research projects tend to be quite applied and the questions we want to answer are quite applied and must have quite high business applicability. Will they impact our pricing and also our view of risk? And for atmospheric perils alone, we have about 19 active internal and external projects. So we're doing a lot, but there are so many more questions out there that we haven't or don't have an answer to, and we would like to do more. If you want to get in touch with me, my email is there on the screen. So that's the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll happily take any questions.
Thank you very much, Alec, for this very complete presentation. Definitely presents a very complex ecosystem of issues to take into account. We do have some specific questions for you in the chat, and what I would like to is perhaps Ines, if you can actually allow the Marina Valdezera Pachetti to actually speak and present her question to Alec. And I believe that one of the questions, Marina, that you also have posted in the chat probably is a question that can later be as well answered by Andrea.
Yeah, thanks both Andrea and Alec for the really interesting presentations. And I have two questions. So I'm gonna ask Alec maybe one that is first more specific to you, and then a question that is a bit more general. So you said that you find review papers very interesting because they sort of give an idea of like scientific consensus, and this is I was wondering when you say this, if you think that there is also space for assessing dissent or dissensus about particular issues in evaluating future impact, and whether, it's like uncertainty quantification, but like maybe a little bit more qualitative, and whether you think that there is a way to integrate this into evaluating insurance premiums and losses, etc. And then, and so like whether in the context of climate services, there is something around that could be done and standardized. And the second question is about sort of how do you take into consideration what models cannot tell you, right? So the sort of element of surprise. And again, how do you deal with that, and whether climate services can help with that in any way?
Sure, yeah, thank you very much. So I'll deal with the first question. So you asked about uncertainty and whether we're interested in uncertainty. I think that was the gist of your question. And yes, we are totally interested in uncertainty. I know from my PhD and sort of my expertise that there are many sort of climate models out there. They can all project a different thing. We tend to take sort of the mean, the ensemble mean, or the mean of multiple climate models. But we have to report on what is the mean change in these climate change stress tests. But internally, we also work on what is the uncertainty in our projections. And we take into account worst case scenarios as well. We're particularly interested in worst case scenarios. Your second question, looking at sort of what might surprise us, and what might, say, climate models not account for. So I guess, again, from my sort of expertise, I'm sort of aware of some of the biases and problems with climate models, and also some of the issues with current methodologies that we use to sort of identify perils. So we sort of do take them into account as well. We try and adjust our models, our catastrophe models, to sort of include our expected these expected surprises, or the adjust for these problems within the models. So we do take that into account as well.
Thanks very much, Alec.
Hopefully that answered.
Yeah. Great. We have one more question for you. Actually, one of the questions was around uncertainty, and I believe that you have already answered that. But there is another question for you from Pradeep Flattery. He says, when you say that standardizing climate services will be very useful to you, can you expand on concrete examples of standardized climate services? Can you give some
Sure.
concrete instance? I believe that's the question.
Yeah, sure. So I think there could be a lot of work done in the climate change space. Like I said, it's very time consuming trying to read all the literature and the consensus, and obtaining the consensus within the science. But we also are aware of some sort of tools that sort of do it, attain that consensus for us, and sometimes we will just end up using one of those tools, those online tools that show the change of climate change on different perils. So for sure, I think climate services can sort of benefit within the climate change space, and trying to attain what that consensus is for changes in tropical cyclone frequency and intensity, but also those sort of more minor perils such as flooding, European windstorms, and wildfires. Something I didn't mention within my presentation, we're sort of really interested in year-to-year changes. So insurance contracts tend to be written on an annual basis. So we're very interested in interannual variability and understanding this. And for example, we know that ENSO, that impacts hurricane frequency globally on sort of yearly timescales. So understanding interannual variability is something that we are also very interested in.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to invite you, Andrea, to join us into this Q&A session. Thank you, Andrea. So we do have a question that I had not seen previously from Andreas Wilwock. I don't know, Andreas, if you are available and will you like to verbally present the question, and Ines can give you access to the microphone. There you are. Perfect. Please,
Yeah,
Andreas.
thanks very much, Asun, and thanks both speakers for their very insightful presentations. Yeah, my question that I had for Andrea was, which kind of basis are you using? Are you working with national weather services or with private providers, or do you have a look on different forecasts for your work to derive your decisions for the renewables?
Yeah. So obviously we want the best information that we can get. So we get information from all of this in National Weather Service, private, and also collaborations with research centers. So we are constantly open to all the information that can be that we can get, and try to select what's most useful for us.
So you're collecting that and you're condensing then the information yourself and deciding, say, on the best guess for you.
Yes, for some cases, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Andrea. I would like you also to answer Marina's question that she posed to Alec, and let me read it for you. So how do energy providers deal with what models cannot provide, and or when there is too much uncertainty? Could climate services help you with that?
Yes, good question. Yes, of course, there is uncertainty also, and it has to be dealt with, and it has to be accounted for. So typically, typically we're using the mean, but always also having some percentiles values above and below to have an estimate of what's the uncertainty range of the values you are using. So then also related to uncertainty, of course, there are uncertainties from different sources. So also you have to account for all of them. So in some cases, maybe uncertainty from another factor may outweigh the uncertainty you get from the forecast. So it's about quantifying uncertainty and bringing everything together.
Thank you, Andrea. And we have a question from Stacy New that I believe probably is for both of you. And she asks, how do you see AI being incorporated into your work in the future, or is it already being used? And let me add to that question, and what are the challenges and the uncertainties that are being introduced by the actual use of artificial intelligence? Alec, you want to start first?
Sure, yeah, I'll go first. So yeah, I am using AI already. So I do a lot of coding in my day-to-day job, and ChatGPT is very useful for debugging code and finding solutions to sort of some problems. So I personally use AI quite a lot, and I'd recommend it to any other coder out there. Within our business, we're sort of exploring AI. However, we're sort of trying to use it to try and automate some recurring tasks. And we're trying to use it as a time-saving tool. So like I said, there are a lot of questions regarding risk and how risk is changing. So it all revolves around time and trying to save time and improving our efficiency.
Thank you. Andrea, how about you?
Yes. IA is indeed pushing a lot, and whenever there are large amounts of data that can be used to try to make predictions into the future. But well, still there is a lot to come in that aspect. And of course, also some of the challenges or the drawbacks that are, again, that's uncertainty of how much you can trust the results you get, when sometimes you might use that as a black box and not know exactly what's going on. But indeed, that's a field that has to be explored, and there can be a lot of things that can be modeled using machine learning algorithms.
Thank you, Andrea. We have a question from Roger Street, and I wonder whether we can also give the microphone to you, Roger, if you want to pose the question. There you are. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Haven't been around for a little bit. I'm aware of some activities that occurred in particularly the relationship between the CAT modeling and climate modeling community. I think it was about 2014, if I remember correctly. There was the Insurance Bureau in the UK and got together an activity where we looked at the CAT modeling community and climate modeling community and seeing where there were relationships, challenges, and other things. And I thought that there was some significant output from that was really valuable. And one of the things that did come out of that is there was a need to continue the dialogue between the CAT modeling and the climate modeling community. And my reflections on that, and like I said, it's 10 years ago, was that a lot of what they were talking about, I think, would be useful to the development of climate services to contribute to the CAT modeling, and of course the CAT modeling contributing to the climate services as well. So I just wondered, are those continuing on? Are you aware whether those, Alex, whether those are continuing on? And if so, are you involved in those discussions? And I know it was the Insurance Bureau that led this in the UK, but I think there was a lot of interest from in the US. And I think, if I remember, my memory's not as good as it used to be. I think AXA was involved in it, but it was RMS, which was the CAT modeling community.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing your insight. I'm not too aware of special events that have been put forward to initiate this, but over my last 3 years, I joined the industry, and over the last couple of years, I've definitely seen an uptake in trying to communicate between academic experts and also the insurance industry. The CAT model vendors, they regularly speak to academics, experts, and they collaborate with them. However, I guess because they're trying to sell a proprietary model, I don't see many of the communications that they have. But with AXA XL, so I'm part of the Royal Meteorological Society Special Insurance Group, and this is a collection of about 30 industry experts and people from science teams, and also about 20 or so academics, and we're trying to initiate this sort of conversation and a regular conversation between academic experts and the insurance industry. I think historically a lot of the dialogue has come from collaborations that sort of aren't sort of public. However, I have seen over the last couple of years much more sort of open conversations between different companies, or having multiple companies within the same room and having the same academics in the same room and trying to discuss the common problem